Think about the last time you flipped a light switch. The gesture is so automatic it barely registers as thought, a casual sovereignty over darkness, achieved in a fraction of a second. You didn't reach for a candle, coax a flame, or wait for your eyes to adjust. The room simply flooded with light, obedient and instantaneous, and you got on with your evening. That switch is the newest thing in human experience. Behind it lies a silence stretching back 300,000 years, the entire tenure of Homo sapiens on this planet, during which sunset meant something absolute. It meant the arrival of a darkness so total, so physical, that you could hold your hand inches from your face and see nothing at all. Not shadow, not outline, nothing. We forget this with astonishing ease. The electric bulb is barely 5 generations old. Every ancestor you can trace by name lived and died inside that ancient dark. Their nights were shaped by it, feared it, worshipped around it, and, if the evidence is to be believed, slept through it in a rhythm entirely unlike our own. Understanding what we have lost requires going back not just to the 18th century or the medieval era, but all the way to the beginning, to the first fire, the first circle of warmth, the first human voice rising into a night sky crowded with stars. Our earliest ancestors were arboreal. They slept above the ground, in trees, because the ground at night was dangerous in ways that are difficult to fully imagine now. Leopards hunted in the dark, hyenas moved in packs through the grass. The advantage of sleeping in the canopy was simple. Elevation is harder to reach. Coming down before dawn was a calculated risk, and the dark hours between sunset and sunrise were largely surrendered to the predators. Fire changed all of this. When our ancestors learned to contain and carry flame, and the dating of deliberate fire use pushes deep into the Pleistocene, potentially as far back as 1,000,000 years, the ground became defensible. A fire's light and heat created a circle of safety, a radius of roughly 30 feet within which the great cats and the wolves would not, as a rule, come. The fire didn't just warm the body, it redrew the entire geometry of the night. Consider what that meant in evolutionary terms. By adding 2 to 4 usable hours to every day, hours that had previously been surrendered to darkness and danger, fire did not merely extend the day. It created a new category of time, protected, warm, communal, and unhurried. For the first time, there was a period after the work of daylight survival was done and before sleep, where nothing was strictly required of anyone. The humans gathered in that circle had time to simply be together. Whatever happened in that firelit time would, over tens of thousands of years, become part of what we are. In the 1970s, anthropologist Polly Wiesner began a decades-long study of the Kung San people of the Kalahari, one of the last hunter-gatherer societies whose daily life remained largely continuous with patterns many thousands of years old. She recorded their conversations across the full arc of daylight and darkness, and what she found was striking enough to reshape how researchers think about the role of fire in human development. During the day, talk among the Kung was overwhelmingly practical. Roughly 80% of daytime conversation was taken up with the logistics of living, food, tools, work, disputes, the management of resources. This makes obvious sense. The day was for doing. At night, around the fire, 81% of conversation shifted to stories, myths, distant adventures, the deeds of ancestors, dreams, the meaning of things. The people who had been cooperative laborers all day became, in the firelight, an audience and a chorus. Someone would begin, and others would add, and the narrative would grow and change and carry the group somewhere beyond the immediate demands of the day. The campfire was the original theater. It was also, in some meaningful sense, the original church. The darkness beyond the light created a stage. The flames themselves, moving, unpredictable, alive in a way that nothing else in the environment quite was, provided an atmosphere that loosened the grip of the practical mind. People became, around fires, more willing to inhabit other perspectives, to follow a story into unknown territory, to ask the questions that daylight, with its unrelenting demands, rarely permitted. This is not a minor footnote to human cultural history. The fireside is where mythology was born, where ritual was invented, where the dead were remembered and the gods were named. The long experiment of sitting together in the dark, with only the fire between us and whatever moved in the night, was, by the measure of evolutionary time, the crucible in which the human imagination was forged. If you have ever lain awake in the middle of the night, mind restless, the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning stretching with a particular, oppressive quality, you may have assumed something was wrong with you. A great deal of modern medical literature would support that assumption. Waking in the night is classified as insomnia. Insomnia is a disorder. Disorders require treatment. But historian Roger Eckhart, after 2 decades of painstaking research through letters, diaries, medical records, and literature from across pre-industrial Europe and beyond, arrived at a different conclusion. What we call insomnia, he argued, is not a malfunction, it is a memory. Before the industrial age, before gas lamps lit the streets of London and Paris, before the rhythms of factory work imposed a single, consolidated block of nighttime on the working population, people almost universally slept in 2 distinct phases. They would fall asleep at dusk or shortly after, sleep for roughly 4 hours, then wake naturally into what they called the watch, a period of 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. The watch was not experienced as a problem to be solved. In the literature Ekirch recovered, it appears as something almost the opposite, a private meditative window in the long dark. People used it to pray, to reflect on their dreams while they were still fresh, to have the kind of unhurried conversation that the demands of daylight seldom permitted. Married couples treated the watch as a time of particular intimacy, the night's most tender hours. The references appear everywhere once you begin to look, in Homer's Odyssey, in Chaucer, in medical texts recommending that patients perform their most careful thinking during the watch. In a letter from a medieval monk describing wakefulness between the night offices as a time when the mind achieves a particular clarity, a receptivity, that daylight hours cannot quite replicate. This was not a minority habit or a cultural quirk. It was, by the weight of the evidence, the human norm. The consolidated 8-hour sleep, the sleep we now regard as natural and whose absence we treat as illness, appears to be a historical artifact, a behavior shaped by artificial light and industrial time, no older than the 19th century. In 1992, psychiatrist Thomas Ware conducted an experiment that seemed at first glance almost perversely simple. He took a group of healthy adults and removed artificial light from their lives entirely, restricting them to the natural cycle of daylight and darkness for a month. He wanted to know what their bodies would do, left to their own devices, in the dark. Within weeks, every subject had spontaneously reverted to a biphasic sleep pattern. They fell asleep around dusk, slept for roughly 4 hours, woke for 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night, then slept again until dawn. Nobody told them to do this, nobody suggested it. The ancient program simply reasserted itself, as if it had been waiting patiently beneath the surface of their modern, light-saturated lives. More remarkable still was what Ware measured during the watch. He found elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with a state of calm, detached alertness, described by some of his subjects as a pleasant, floating quality of consciousness unlike ordinary wakefulness. The sensation was closer to meditation than to the anxious, clock-checking alertness of a modern insomniac. It was, they said, peaceful. The body, it seems, had not forgotten what the middle of the night was for. Stripped of the artificial stimulation that ordinarily suppressed its ancient rhythms, it reverted immediately to the pattern it had refined over 300 millennia. 4 hours of sleep, a luminous hour of wakeful rest, and 4 more hours of sleep before the dawn. What Ware had demonstrated with clinical precision was that the segmented sleep of Ekirch's historical records was not merely a social custom shaped by candlelight and cold bedrooms. It was biological, it was built in. The consolidated 8-hour sleep, by contrast, appears to require constant active suppression of what the body would otherwise naturally do. Suppression provided, in modern life, by the unrelenting presence of artificial light. The transformation happened quickly, in historical terms. Gas lamps arrived in London streets in 1807. By the mid-19th century, the interior of European cities was lit through the night in a way that would have seemed miraculous, or perhaps sinister, to any previous generation. Then, in 1879, Thomas Edison demonstrated a practical incandescent bulb, and within a generation the night itself had been fundamentally altered. The effects on sleep were not immediately recognized, because the effects on productivity and commerce were so obviously, overwhelmingly positive. The night shift was born. The evening entertainment industry expanded. The hours between sunset and sleep were colonized by activity in a way that would have been impossible, simply impossible, for any previous human society. The darkness that had structured 10,000 generations of human life was abolished by decree of the market and the machine. What we now know, thanks to decades of sleep research, is that artificial light, and particularly the blue spectrum light emitted by LED screens, actively suppresses the production of melatonin, the hormone that signals to the body that night has arrived. Every hour spent under electric light in the evening delays the biological onset of night. The ancient program that governed our ancestors' sleep, the long, quiet arc from dusk to watch to dawn, is being perpetually overridden by the devices in our hands and the lights in our ceilings. The epidemic of sleeplessness that afflicts the modern world may not be a new problem at all. It may be an ancient rhythm asserting itself against an artificial environment that refuses to acknowledge it. When you lie awake at 2 in the morning, mind restless, unable to understand why sleep won't come or return, consider the possibility that your body is not malfunctioning. It is remembering. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, waiting for the watch that your light-soaked life has never properly allowed it to have. The hour of quiet wakefulness, the prolactin glow, the reflective stillness between two sleeps. These are not symptoms of a disorder. They are the ghost of a birthright. We traded something for the light switch. We traded the Milky Way for one thing. Most people alive today have never seen it properly, have never stood under a truly dark sky and felt the sheer weight of the galaxy overhead. We traded the campfire and its stories, the watch and its meditations, the second sleep and its gentle return. We traded 300,000 years of nocturnal human experience for the ability to banish darkness at will. And we did it in the span of 4 or 5 generations, before anyone thought to ask what the dark had been for. Perhaps it was worth it. Almost certainly in many ways it was. But the body has a long memory, longer than culture, longer than convenience, longer than the industrial century that rewired the night. And in the small hours, when the house is quiet and the blue light is finally off and sleep will not come, you can sometimes feel that memory stirring, patient, ancient, and wondering when you are coming home.